So this is a custom home that I built in Alachua, Florida, and I started this house in June of 2025, and I finished it in January of 2026. And so, this is a horse farm property for some clients moving up from South Florida. And in this video, I'm going to go over, some of the key features and details, of this home and of the construction of this home, from start to finish. So the first stage of construction is site work. So this map we're looking at here on the screen is the topography map of the parcel. So this particular parcel is a little under 7 acres, and this is going to be a horse property. So, there's going to be a horse barn, pretty much right in the middle of the property. And the back half of this is going to be horse pasture. The home is going about 150 feet off the road, kind of centered on the front half of the property. So, where the house is going, in this topography map picture, we're seeing the slope of the property is sloping towards the front right corner, which is the southeast corner. There's about a 12-foot fall off from the back of the property to the front of the property. So, where the home is in this case, there was a couple foot fall off, from the back left corner of the home to the front right corner of the home. So we had to bring in a little extra fill dirt, the normal, to build the front right corner and the front of the home up a little bit, to make sure it's level. Now, this is not an extreme situation. Once the home's graded in and we bring sod in, it's not something you're really going to notice. But as you can see, is one of the things we look for at this stage is, what is the topography looking like? Or do we have a fall off? How many loads of filter are we bringing in? And so, in this case, we had to bring in, 30 plus loads of fill dirt for this house. But we brought in a roller and get it good and compacted. And so that way, when we pour the foundation, which in this case we did a monolithic slab, that foundation is sitting on, good compacted soil. Essentially, we want it to be just as good as virgin soil, the stuff that's been there for thousands of years. So, we get it good and compacted and bring in a really heavy roller to do that. And so like I mentioned, we used a monolithic slab on this house. And so that's really the most popular type of foundation in Florida on new construction homes. The alternative is a stem wall, which I do a lot of as well, where you're building the house up in the air with blocks. But this was a situation where my clients did not want, large steps up into the home or any issues down the line with accessibility into the house. So we went with a monolithic slab for, a slab on grade and ease of getting into the house rather than having to go up steps. And so here's some shots of, once the home is framed up, at this stage, we're getting a sheathing inspection. So, the plywood's up on the roof, the OSB's on the walls. We have specific nail spacing specified by the engineer that we have to follow. And, that's what we're inspecting at this stage. At this stage, I always go up on the roof and make sure we're not missing any nails. We have the spacings correct, all that type of stuff. So on this home, I use CDX plywood for the roof decking. I always use 5/8 roof decking now as a minimum on my homes. The reason why I use plywood on this house is because we're doing a metal roof, and most of the roofing manufacturers spec plywood for a substrate. But if I don't use plywood, I'm using 5/8 Advantech, which is actually an even more expensive product, and lays super flat and doesn't swell, and it's a really great product. But in this case, we're using CDX plywood, which everybody's familiar with, and everybody likes to hear that we're using up on the roof. So that's in this case, we're using 5/8 CDX for the roof sheathing, and everything's looking good. We got the nail spacing correct. We're not missing any trusses with nails. And so, that's what we, are looking at this stage. And here's one of the shots that I took when I was up on the roof, checking the nailing spacings. I didn't take any live video, but here's one of the shots I took when I was up there. And I'll always do this on every house just to make sure everything's nailed off correctly and laying flat and we're looking good before we dry in. And one of the, main questions I get when clients are moving up from South Florida specifically is, wood frame versus block. In the Alachua area, which is where this house is being built, I do occasionally build block homes in this area, but the vast majority of new construction homes are wood frame. Just with us being, so far north and the 130-mile-an-hour wind zone, we're getting into that area where every home starts to be a wood frame house. And that's what you're seeing here on this custom home. And so now in these shots here, you're going to see the house dried in. So that means we've got double synthetic underlayment up on the roof, and we have Tyvek house wrap on the house. I always use Tyvek rather than standard woven house wrap because it's actually going to keep the water out. But this is a big milestone. So basically now, if it's raining every day, which we framed this home in July, so it was raining every day or every other day, it's going to allow the trades to work in the house and not have to worry about, if it's going to rain in the afternoon. And we also don't have to worry about, the roof decking getting wet or the framing inside the home. So this is a really, big milestone in construction. And so now we're going to move inside the house and look at framing, at this stage. This is really my favorite stage of construction. Whenever I started building, this is really the stage that interested me the most because it's really what holds the house together. It's tough from a inspection and supervision standpoint because there's so much to find, so much to look at, so many structural connectors to get right. But I personally love this stage of construction. So what we're looking at here is bracing. So this is used to strengthen, weaker or more vulnerable points in the trusses. This is identified by the truss engineer and structural engineer. So the roof decking holds trusses in place really well, and that's really the strongest part of your roof. Your trusses are being held together by the roof decking, but there's weak points and long spans, and here you'll see there's a weak point on gable end walls. There's a hinge point at the top of the wall and the bottom of the gable end truss, and so this gable end bracing is addressing that weak point, so that way it can't push in during really heavy winds. And so I always use H10 hurricane straps, my larger trusses, and that's what we're taking a look at there. And, here we see an interior load-bearing wall. So we have anchor bolts put in place with SP1s on the bottom of the wall. And then at the top of the wall, we have SP2s put into place. And you'll see here on the other side of the wall, we have the H10s to hold those trusses down on this interior bearing wall. And so here's, a heavier duty hold down, on a double door to the back porch. We got to use 2x6 exterior walls. That's what we're taking a look at here. Making sure there's no shiners, make sure there's no nails that we put in the exterior sheathing that miss the studs. You don't want that. So we want to make sure every nail we put in on the exterior found its way into a stud. And so here's a back porch that's rafter frame. So you don't see a ton of this in Florida. We wanted that open gable look on the back porch. And so, you see we got the coil strapping, over the ridge there. And from underneath, you see the 2x6 rafters and the ridge beam we have in place and the angled buckets we have on these rafters. So, kind of a cool little feature. We'll show the tongue groove here at the end. So one thing that I really like to do is fiber cement, hardy board, fascias and soffits, and they're going to hold up so well over time, and they are more expensive. They're about twice as expensive as aluminum, which is a lot of builders' standards in this area. But for me, I love the strength of the hardy fascia and soffit. And so something else, really one last thing during the framing stage, I always like to prioritize above garage storage. So we'll always put the extra roof decking that we have left over in that area and, the middle part of the truss. That way you have extra storage. And so here we are, about 2/3 of the way through construction at this stage. And we got the exterior painted, we got the roof on at this point. Also at this point we have the concrete parking pad and walkway in place. There's still quite a bit to do on the home, but we are about 2/3 of the way through construction at this point. You can see we still got the boxes of stone out near the front, and the stone's been put in place, and the trim hasn't been put on top of the stone yet, but the stone was recently laid at this point. And we see we got the dumpster here, and you're going to see the horse barn there in the back. That's also halfway through construction, which the homeowner contracted specifically with a barn company for that directly. That's kind of working in conjunction with the house. But you see here we've got the AC unit in place, and at this point, called for semi-perm. We got the meter on the house. which, the different parts of the country, they don't let you put the meter on the house until the end. Fortunately, where I build, we are able to put the meter on the house partway through construction. And so, you see that open gable there on the end. We got kind of like the sunburst design that's pretty popular on those open gable porches. And so the house is looking really good at this stage. We've got the septic tank and drain field in. That's what we have staked out here. So we don't want anybody driving over the septic tank and drain field. So we try to keep it, flagged off so that way everybody knows where it is. You see a little bit of the wind picking up there. But, hopefully, in this case, the flag was able to stay in place throughout construction. But we always try to put that in a place that's not going to get driven on. So in this case, you see, where the garage is, where the parking pad is in relation to where the drain field is. And, on the opposite side of the home is a great place for it. So that way it's away from cars and, not as likely to get driven on. And of course, we make the homeowner aware of where this is and, hopefully it will never get driven on and crushed or anything like that. And so here's a shot, pretty soon after those other shots, we were putting gutters in. So I like to put gutters on all my homes just to control water. And that's a little shot of the installation. And so here we are a little bit later on. You've got the floors in. We have the cardboard paper down to protect the floors. We're pretty far along at this point. This is about 80% of the way through construction. We've got the baseboards in, pretty far along. This mainly at this stage, it's mainly punch out type stuff. The plumbers are going to have to come back. The electricians are going to have to come back. The AC companies have to get the AC unit, fine tuned and that type of stuff. But, we are, like I said, about 80% of the way through construction at this point. And, we've got the countertops all covered up because we don't want those to get scratched. And, like I said, at this point, it seems like the home is done. And I tell people that, the foundation will go quickly, the framing will go quickly. But at this stage, all the little pieces that have to come together, we really want it to turn out great for the homeowner. So getting all these little pieces correct in the last 2 or 3 months of construction, it takes a little bit longer than some may expect, but it's really an important part of the process. And so here's the home about a week before completion. And so we have the mulch in, we got some African irises in, we brought in about 7,500 square feet of Bahia sod, which it is January, so the Bahia sod is not looking great, but, come summertime, it's going to pick up and it's going to grow great Bahia grass, which was growing in the fields next to this job site and what was growing previously before we started construction. And so here we see on this home we did cypress tongue and groove porch ceilings, which is something I do at about half of my houses. I love cypress for this. It's, a native Florida wood species and it holds up really well to moisture. I've used pine before, but it does not hold up as well as the cypress. So cypress is about twice as expensive, but it is worth the extra cost in my opinion. It stains more consistently and it's going to hold up a little bit better to moisture over time. And so on these farmhouse homes, we're seeing a lot of this tongue and groove porch ceiling. So I'm always using cypress. And so here we got a good shot of this Eldorado stone that was installed on the porches. We got the trim caps put on now, and it's turned out really nice. You had a nice little trim detail on the front of this home, and there's a little shot of the soffit. Once it's painted and installed, we got the gutter on the face of the fascia there. And like I said, we do gutters on all my houses. I'm really big into controlling where the rain runoff is going. And so you'll see here we have French drains in the ground. The downspouts are connected to, and we'll run those about 5 to 10 feet away from the house. So that way we're getting the water, away from the home and not, we got gutters put in place, but we want to direct where that, where the gutters are pushing the water. And we do that with the French drains. So here's just some more shots of the painted hardy fascia soffit, which looks a little bit different than aluminum if that's what you're used to. But super durable. We're able to paint it, so we're able to kind of control color a little bit better. Definitely a big fan of that. And so here's, on this home, we did a whole house generator, which I'm doing very often now. This was a 22 kW based on the size of the home. And we've got, a gas tank put in place for it, which we're going to get a little shot of here. We got that staked off as well. We don't want anybody running over the gas tank. And then we'll get a little shot of the transfer switch put on the wall. I always use Generac. That's the most popular generator manufacturer right now, at least in Florida. That's what almost everybody's installing. And so here we've got a good shot of the 12-inch hardy plank siding. So I like to use 12-inch hardy plank siding, on my farmhouse style homes. It's a little bit different than the 6-inch reveal that you see, on a lot of standard homes. It's a little, costs just a touch more, but it's worth it for a little bit more of a custom look. And so here's the inside of the home. My clients wanted white shaker cabinets in this house, which is very easy to do. Every manufacturer is carrying white, is able to make white shaker cabinets or carries white shaker cabinets as a standard color and door style. And so that's what we did in this house. We also did 24 by 24 tiles throughout. And so that's what we're getting a shot of here. We've got a couple floor outlets back there in place. So that way they, my clients can access power in the middle of their family room. And, so we got, the guest bathroom, guest bedrooms, typical split floor plan house, which you're seeing a lot of nowadays. And, we got some, 3-panel doors at this home, which, for some builders are an upgrade, but they're included in my standard interior door options. And so we also have solid closet shelving. That's a big thing. I typically include allowances for solid shelving throughout the house because that's something that's going to hold up better over time, and clients definitely prefer it. Also in this house, I'm not sure if you can tell, but we have an upgraded trim detail above the windows and doors. And we have what I'm calling a craftsman style header, which is where we use 1x4 legs, but then we use a 1x2 horizontally on the top and bottom of a 1x6 to kind of create extra interest and extra detail at the top of the windows. And in this area, most of the country style homes are going to have window casings, depending on the specific preferences of the client. But whenever I do window casings, we're going to do wood jambs and, always thicker casing, a minimum 1x4 or 3.5-inch wide casing. We can do, a Howell profile or, there's other profiles you can do besides flat, but we're typically doing a minimum of 3.5-inch casings. In this case, we have 3.5-inch legs, 3.5-inch apron, and then a bigger header for that extra trim detail that we're seeing. And then also in the great room, so we've got faux collar ties, which you're kind of catching in the corner of the screen there a little bit. And that's really popular on a lot of my homes now to give that, the wood accent in the great room, in the ceiling. We're really big into ceiling details, like this tray ceiling we've got in the dining room. And you want there to be some interest in the ceiling, whether it's trays or vaulted ceilings or, faux beams or faux rafters. We do a lot of that in our homes. And then here on the back porch, you see the tongue and groove porch ceiling. It's vaulted. We actually have a real ridge beam in there, but we wrapped it in cypress, and it turned out really well. And we got some can lights there in the ceiling for extra light. And so going back to the kitchen, so this house we used white shaker cabinets. They'll always be soft closed doors and drawers, solid wood, boxes, if they're going to be painted cabinets, typically maple is what we're going with. You see here we've got, under cabinet lighting and a pot filler. White shakers, definitely a standard, color and door profile combination. A lot of my clients are going with, a different color island or a really fancy hood or what have you. And all of those are typical options. We went with quartz countertops here, which is something I prefer is to go with quartz because you're able to control color really well, and it holds up, really well without needing to be resealed as often as natural stone does. So I'm a big proponent of the quartz. And so here in the primary bedroom, we have a 2-foot tray ceiling. which we could fit up into the trusses without any issue. So that's what we have going on here. And so this is a finished look of the attic. So this is all that floor decking we put in, the extra roof decking. So we have quite a bit of storage up here, which my clients always really appreciate. And so we got a look here at the insulation blown in the attic. And so we got an attic marker right here we can take a look at. See, we got plenty of insulation. So I use fiberglass R38 as my standard. I do spray foam quite a bit too. I prefer a vented attic with fiberglass. It's going to cut down on a lot of potential issues that you could have with spray foam in a non-vented attic. So my standard I put on most of my estimates is a vented attic with R38 fiberglass, and that's what we have in this home. And like I said, plenty of storage up here for the Christmas tree and, whatever else you want to store. So yeah, this house turned out great. It was a fun one to build, in Alachua, which, is where I'm from. And, I hope to build more homes like this in the Alachua area moving forward.